Heartily welcome to all of you on our YouTube channel CS Ansar. We are back within the interesting topic, the assessment proceeding practical mistake text professional make with the CA Lina ma'am. Lina ma'am will be explain us the in clearly way and easy way so that we can get to know the knowledge from that. And also thank you so much, ma'am, Lina ma'am, to join us and giving your valuable time. So, before we further ado, I having a smallest request to all of you, those who are watching us, to subscribe our YouTube channel and do not forget to like and share and comment. And also, if you guys having any doubt, please drop your comment in the comment section and definitely we will reply. Now, I would like to invite you to share your thoughts on the today topic.
Thank you, Stella, for such a warm welcome. And thank you, CS Ansar, for allowing me yet one more opportunity to be on your esteemed channel. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for hearing me on this topic. Now, today, as Stella said, that we will be talking about practical mistakes that we often make during assessment proceedings. So, without wasting much time, let's get started. Now, all of us have represented our clients at different points of time before different fora, be it assessment in income tax, adjudication in GST, appellate proceedings, criminal proceedings. All of us have represented our clients, and there have been instances where, in spite of our best preparation as far as law is concerned, fact is concerned, the hearing may not go the way we had thought, and that sometimes leave us confused that what happened, like everything that I did was right, where did the hearing go wrong? Now, I have been doing litigation for quite some time now, over a lot of years, and one thing I've observed that assessment proceedings, now I'm specifically using assessment proceedings, but this applies to all the proceedings, all the hearings before any fora, is definitely not only about complete preparation as far as law and facts is concerned. Now, all of us over here professionals, definitely there is no lack of knowledge as far as law, provisions of law, amendments are concerned. When one goes for a hearing, all these things definitely one has complete idea of. So I'm not going to talk about those things. But my experience, my life lessons as far as litigation is concerned have shown that assessments or hearings are not cases are not weakened by lack of knowledge. That is always there. However, avoidable mistakes in strategy, documentation, communication, these are the places where sometimes an unintended mistake leads to an outcome which is not very favorable. So, what I have learned over these years, I've put them into a PPT of 10 mistakes that can be avoided to lead better outcomes and what helps us in representing the cases better. So, let's get started. Now, the very first thing is that especially the new professionals make is not reading the notice properly. Now, when I say reading the notice, it does not mean just reading the section under which the notice is issued and the allegation made, because it is the normal instinct of every professional whenever a notice is received to immediately get started, and in their mind they start thinking, oh acha, what are the facts pertaining to this case, acha, what is the law point, why did I do this, why, how will I defend this? My advice is to stop right there. Instead of straight away running and mentally preparing the documentation, case laws, just to stop all of that analysis and read the notice. And when I say read the notice, I mean reading the notice the way it has been served upon us, the date, the communication number, section under which the notice is issued, the allegation raised. Why is this important? This is important because over the years, one thing that I've seen is a defective notice, inadequate notice is one of the biggest reasons for proceedings being quashed. How can a notice be inadequate, defective, incomplete if it is not issued, if the AO or the person issuing the notice is not jurisdictionally authorized to issue that notice, or the section under which the notice is issued is incorrect, or the information sought could not have been sought under that very section. The date of issuance of notice, maybe it is time barred. So these mistakes on the notice, a lot of times these become the very reason wherein we can win our assessment. So Before and once, what happens when we start preparing the case, these things get sidelined. So when you receive the notice, first thing is to read the notice correctly. Is the notice correctly issued? Is the notice defective? So that is something that is really, really helpful. Second is the manner in which the notice is responded to. It plays a very big role. Two things need to be kept in mind. First is timeline. We need to respect the timelines. Of course, unless the timeline is very short, legally, even that can become an objection. But if the timeline is decent enough, instead of seeking just an adjournment, we should ideally try to respond within the timeline. Sometimes information sort is so much we cannot prepare all of it. In that case, even a partial data with a reasonable request to allow us some more time to comply is very, very helpful. Second is to keep the tone of the notice very courteous. We are here to represent the client, but the department is not our enemy. We are not here for any confrontation. We can be firm without being impolite. The tone has to be very, very polite, courteous, because what happens is, suppose the case were to travel at a higher level, what is on record is our reply, and that definitely plays a very big role in the mindset the appellate and the tribunal of authorities form while deciding on our case. So what is on record should be polite, courteous, non-evasive, respect for timeline, because these shows that the attitude of the appellant has always been a very cooperative attitude. So this has definitely has a positive impact. I'll bring it to you in a few moments how this is important by way of practical examples. Before going into that, let us see uh, furnishing info without checking relevance. Now, department obviously is authorized to seek information from us, and it is our duty as our clients AR to furnish those information. However, some professional judgment needs to be exercised before simply acting as a post office to collect information and dump it on the AO. We need to understand, why is this information sought? Does it have any relevance to the section under which the notice is sought? Is there any nexus between the information sought and the allegation raised? Once that is determined, the manner in which information is supplied is also very important. Merely dumping a lot of data on the EO is not a very helpful situation for the client, because it can lead to a situation where the scope of your inquiry gets unnecessarily widened because a lot more information has been furnished. They have a lot more to look into. So questions which were not originally there might crop up. That is one risk. Second, when to speak, what to speak is important, but where to draw the line is also important. Like, I was representing a case in my early days, and in a overzealousness to show that, oh, my client has every available evidence to prove his fact, I supplied a lot of information. In the end, the assessing officer started thinking, why so much information being supplied? Is there something that the assessee is trying to hide? So that day, I learned a very important lesson of litigation, and that is restraint is a very important professional skill. While we know what to supply, we should also know what not to supply. In this, and here I do not mean non-cooperation. Here, study the data. How is the data relevant? Mark it so that they find it easy to understand what is it that we're going to say. Another thing that can be avoided is drafting your reply without understanding the facts. The primary rule of responses is law follows facts. This is absolutely non negotiable. On the face of it, the notice might raise a legal question. We want to reply a legal response by case laws and circulars and all of that. Fine, very nice. But before that, we need to understand the facts, whether at that point of time they appear relevant or not. We need to understand what is the nature of the business, what are the commercial circumstances, what is the timeline leading to this notice. Apart from this, we also need to have a complete hang of all the information pertaining to the appellant or the client available on the public domain. Today, a lot of information is available in the public domain: AIS, TIS, financial statement, 26AS, and the Income Tax Act. But other laws also, a lot of information is in public domain: GST returns and company ROC data. So when we are before furnishing a reply, we really need to understand what are the facts, what is in record, because our reply cannot be in contradiction to the facts that is already in public domain. Because if it goes that way, the first impression is that we do not know our own case. Immediately, a mistrust is created in our responses. In continuation to this, earlier proceedings pertaining to the assessee must also be looked into. And when I say early proceedings under various laws, especially GST, plays a very big role, because GST issues a lot of notices. Even if you're dealing with Income Tax Act, we need to look into what has happened in GST, what are the allegations, what has happened in the ROC, if there are any notices. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration, because the reply that is going to go has to cover everything. We cannot operate under one law in today's era when your client is complying with multiple laws. So your reply has to be made after understanding all of this. This brings us to my next point, that law cannot be looked in isolation, because when you're preparing a reply, you are not preparing it for one law. I'd like to bring upon a case that will make this point clear. A client once approached me with a GST notice. The allegation in the notice was that the client has not made complete disclosure of their turnover. This was surprising because there was no other information. How did the department come to this allegation? On a little understanding of facts, I realized there was an assessment proceedings which had been undertaken on the client, and the client for some cash deposits made in the account. The client had filed the return under presumptive taxation, only considering the bank deposits. The cash deposits were not considered. Obviously, Income Tax Department issued a notice. Now, the AR representing the client at that point of time, to deal with this issue, what did he do? He made invoices for cash sales, showing them as counter sale. It was a B2C, of course, retail trade. So he created invoices, filed it, and over there he got away with just profit percentage on the undisclosed invoices. However, these invoices triggered a notice in the GST, because these were invoices were never uploaded on the GST portal. So what I'm trying to say is, we cannot operate under one law today, because information is all digital. Department share information. So while preparing the reply, you cannot look for a short-term relief in under one act. Definitely, as a good professional, we have to ensure that this very reply does not create more problems for them. Now, the mistake that or no, I wouldn't say mistake, overlap is not understanding the importance of acknowledged copies. Now, this may appear to be a small administrative mistake, but trust me when I tell you, it affects the outcome of the proceedings. I was representing a case of a client before the tribunal. Now, over here, what had happened, those were the days of physical hearings. So, following the scrutiny proceeding, the notices issued by the department, the heir of the client had visited the assessing officer and discussed the case. Now, the assessment order merely recorded this fact, that the AR, naming whoever was present, had appeared with documents. No documents were clarified on the face of the assessment records. Assessee also had not kept any acknowledged copies of what he had filed. Anyway, over there, the case was decided ex parte, supposedly for lack of information. Assessee goes and files an appeal. A physical hearing takes place. Again, the assessee does the same thing. He files a submission along with evidences. There is a record of the submission being filed. The submission does not mention the annexures of enclosures and closures. Neither was there an acknowledged copy of the documents being filed. Unfortunately for him, the matter went to NFAC. NFAC received only the submission. They subsequently possibly held a remand, and the assessee did not respond, thinking he's already filed the documents. When the matter reached the tribunal, the impression the tribunal got was, okay, no documents were filed as assessment, no documents were filed at appellate level, and in spite of the pleadings of the client that documents were filed, there were no acknowledged copies. So how, even if they wanted to help, how would they help? So this is where acknowledged copies, complete record of what have you filed, really helps in the long run. And when I say acknowledged copies, not really Annexure 1, 2, 3, no. Ideally, it helps. Annexure 1 sale deed, 2 purchase deed. This is really, really helpful, especially if the case were to travel at a higher form. Even if it is not, subsequent years, if the assessments were reopened, we can always look into it and say these documents were already filed. So that also helps us in going in the long run. Now, faceless assessment. Now you'll say that today is not the era of physical hearing. Now we are in the e-proceedings, faceless assessment. The rules of the games have changed. We need to forego the old habits now. We need to play it in the manner of the new rules. For those of our clients who are our regular clients, ideally we should log into portal and check for notices, because A, how many clients check emails for notices, we are all aware of. Reminders sometimes go into spam. So if we were to be in this habit to check notices from the portal, definitely compliance would be done. Then, of course, in faceless, we are required to submit our documentation, so that a record is always there. However, portal glitch is something that is known to all of us. It's not unknown. Portals keep changing. It is our duty to make sure that whatever we has been filed, we have a complete acknowledgement. It is our duty to ensure that whatever we are uploading has been uploaded completely. Maybe due to some internet issue, sometimes the file gets corrupted, or sometimes half upload is done. All this will harm us only. So we have to ensure that everything is uploaded, it is visible, and we have downloaded copies of whatever we have filed. At the same time, there may be issues which we know that no matter how many submissions we file, department will not be convinced. We have the option of choosing video conferencing. We should choose it. We should speak whatever we want to, because at least there has to be an online record of whatever is in our mind as far as representation is concerned. All these definitely may be time consuming, especially sometimes in the portal is slow, but in the long run, they definitely prove to be very, very helpful. Not reading the room. Now, this applies more to physical hearings, like say before tribunal or GST proceedings. All of us go very well prepared for the hearings. But this has been an experience for most of us that sometimes the hearing does not go in the direction in which we intended it to go. We may have prepared, okay, I'm going to say this, say this, say this, and but the assessing officer or the person sitting on the chair starts discussion on an entirely different line. What do we do then? We have to understand what is the mindset. See, we are not here to fight or convince my case, nothing. We are here to win an assessment and explain to the AO. And it has to be explained in the manner in which he finds convincing, no matter our preparation may be on a different line. So that is what I mean by reading the room. Understand what is it that the AO wants. How do we convince him? If that needs a change in the argument different to the line we've taken, that needs to be done. We cannot simply go on what we prepared. It's a skill that we develop, we have to develop. Forgetting professionalism is always remembered. This is something that's very interesting. You know, it might look very small, but professional dignity does definitely play a very, very important role. This I learned in very early days of litigation. I was told that the biggest argument that you are going to carry into any officer's office is your professional dignity. Of course, we are on different sides. We are bound to disagree, but disagreement does not call for a compromise on dignity. We cannot, there is no need to disrespect. Courtesy has to be maintained, because cases will come and go. It is our professional dignity which definitely creates a long-term image of us as AR of the client. Credibility is built by conduct, and that conduct has to be consistent, no matter what the other side says. And before I close this session, I also wanted to bring that a lot of times there are certain procedural errors, like hearing is not conducted properly. There's a violation of principle of natural justice, like we are given a statement, there's no opportunity of being heard provided, cross objections have not been filed. In all these cases, what do we do? A lot of times we agree and continue the hearing, but later on when this objection is raised, the common view that the appellate and higher authorities take is that you've already cooperated with the department at that point of time. Now that the assessment has resulted in reddition, you're taking this argument. Hence, it is always wise to put an objection on record at the time at which it occurs. No matter thereafter, we might continue. An objection has to be in record. If the assessing officer answers to the objection, very good. If he doesn't, yet there's an on-record objection, which subsequently definitely helps us. So we see that assessment proceedings are not only about understanding and interpreting statutory provisions. It is about strategy, documentation, communication, conduct. All these also play a very important role in the hearings. So, if I were to just quickly summarize today's discussion, please read the notice carefully. Ensure that when we reply, it's within time and courteous. Relevance of the query needs to be understood. We need to be fully aware of the facts before drafting. We need to maintain consistency across law. We cannot answer under one law, ignoring other laws. We need to keep a record of all the evidences furnished. The importance of this cannot be overemphasized. We have to adapt to the course of the hearing. Just because the hearing is going in a way we did not anticipate, that does not mean we do not change our arguments and remain respectful and professional. So the quality of assessment is not determined only how much we speak, it is determined by how we prepare, how carefully we document, and how and where we exercise our professional judgments. These are the lessons I have learned, and they have helped me tremendously over the years. I'm still learning more lessons, but I hope this will prove to be helpful to you the way they have been to me. So that is all from my side today. Thank you, Stella, and thank you, viewers, for listening.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You explained very wonderfully by the step by step, and you mentioned very important point, which is important for us. And those are watching, if you guys having any doubt, please drop your question in the comment section, and definitely we will reply you. Again, Leena, ma'am, thank you so much to maintain your energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you so much.